What if I told you that one of the greatest figures in biblical history wasn't buried for centuries? That his body, instead of resting in the promised land, remained sealed in a sarcophagus hidden in Egypt? Joseph of Egypt, betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, imprisoned unjustly, rose to become the second most powerful man in the world. But his story didn't end there. His final request, the fate of his remains, and the biblical mystery surrounding his burial hold secrets that few truly understand. Why was his body preserved for generations? What deeper prophecy was at play? Stay with me, because today we're uncovering a forgotten chapter of the Bible, one that will change the way you see Joseph's legacy forever. Most people don't realize it, but Joseph of Egypt, one of the most remarkable figures in biblical history, was actually mummified. Unlike the traditional burials of his ancestors, his body was preserved according to Egyptian customs and placed in a sarcophagus, waiting for centuries before being taken to the promised land. Imagine the weight of this. He was a man who lived by faith, yet his final resting place was delayed for generations. His body remained in Egypt, a silent witness to God's unfolding plan. But why did this happen? Even though Joseph had been a powerful leader in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh, his heart was always set on God's promises. Before his death, he made his family swear that his remains would not stay in Egypt permanently. His request wasn't just about a proper burial, it was a declaration of faith. He believed in God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, trusting that one day Israel would leave Egypt for good. That's profound. How many of us live with that kind of certainty about God's promises, even when we don't see them fulfilled in our lifetime? Think about it. Joseph's body remained unburied for centuries. That's not a small detail. It's a prophetic symbol. His mummified body became a reminder to every Israelite that their story in Egypt was temporary. Every time someone saw his sarcophagus, they were confronted with a question: when will we return home? It's as if God was using Joseph's remains to keep hope alive, reinforcing the promise that slavery would not be their end. A strange yet powerful legacy. To this day, biblical scholars and historians find Joseph's mummification fascinating. Egyptian embalming was an elaborate process, reserved mainly for royalty and nobles. The fact that Joseph, a Hebrew, received such a treatment shows the extraordinary respect he commanded in Egypt. Could his preservation have been an intentional act by God, a way to ensure that his body would endure until the Exodus? It makes you wonder how many things in our lives seem like coincidences, but are actually part of a divine setup. And here's another layer to consider. When Moses finally led the Israelites out of Egypt, he made sure to take Joseph's remains with them. Exodus 13:19. That moment must have been profound. After generations of waiting, Joseph's body finally moved toward its true destination. It wasn't just a physical journey, it was a fulfillment of faith, proof that God never forgets his promises. Joseph's story challenges us. Do we trust God enough to plant seeds today for a future we may never see? Joseph's final resting place in Shechem ties his life back to the covenant of his forefathers, but that's just one part of the story. Before reaching that moment, we need to look at how this Hebrew boy, once sold as a slave, rose to the highest ranks in Egypt without ever losing sight of his true identity. Power has a way of making people forget where they came from. But Joseph of Egypt was different. Even after rising to the highest ranks in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh, he never lost sight of who he was. He walked like an Egyptian, dressed like, and even spoke their language. But deep inside, he remained a Hebrew, a son of Jacob, a servant of the God of Abraham. That's rare. Many would have embraced the Egyptian culture entirely, abandoning their roots. Yet Joseph's heart was, anchored in something greater, God's covenant with his people. It would have been easy for Joseph to blend in completely. After all, he had everything: wealth, authority, influence. He was even given an Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, and married the daughter of an Egyptian priest. But even with all of that, he never let Egypt define him. How many today, when given status and comfort, forget where they came from? Joseph's life teaches a crucial lesson. Identity in God is greater than any title the world can give. True success isn't about rising to power, it's about staying faithful when you get there. Joseph's faithfulness wasn't just a personal conviction, it shaped his leadership. He ruled with wisdom, not arrogance. Instead of exploiting his position for personal gain, he used it to save lives. He saw his authority as a responsibility, not a privilege. When the famine struck, he didn't hoard resources. He managed them wisely, ensuring Egypt and surrounding nations had food. Imagine if modern leaders operated with that mindset. He understood something powerful. God had placed him there for a purpose. His success wasn't about him. It was about fulfilling God's plan. And speaking of purpose, Joseph never forgot the bigger picture. He knew Egypt wasn't the final destination for God's people. Even at the height of his power, he never mistook Egypt for home. That's why, on his deathbed, he made his family swear to take his bones back to the promised land. Genesis 50:25. That's incredible. Most people think about wealth or legacy at the end of their lives, but Joseph's concern was God's promise. He was so sure of Israel's future that he planned his burial as an act of faith. His life challenges us to ask, what defines us? Is it our success, our job, our social status? Or is it something deeper, something unshakable? Joseph had everything Egypt could offer, but his heart belonged to God's promises. And because of that, his legacy endured. His story wasn't just about personal triumph, it was about being part of something much bigger than himself. But to fully understand why his story is so powerful, we have to look at how God's faithfulness shaped every step of his journey. If there's one thing Joseph's life proves, it's that God never forgets his promises. From the moment he was sold into slavery to the day he became Egypt's ruler, every event in his journey was orchestrated by divine hands. But here's the thing, God's faithfulness didn't always look like immediate blessings. In fact, for years, Joseph's life seemed to be going in the wrong direction. Betrayed by his own brothers, falsely accused, thrown into prison. Where was God in all of that? The answer? Right there, working behind the scenes. Joseph's life is a masterclass in trusting God, even when circumstances seem unfair. Think about it. How many people today give up on their faith the moment things go wrong? Yet Joseph never let his hardships define him. He could have grown bitter, could have doubted God, could have given up. But instead, he remained faithful, and in time, God's plan was revealed. The famine that could have destroyed nations ended up being the very thing that elevated him. What looked like misfortune was actually positioning him for his destiny. And this is where it gets even more powerful. God didn't just fulfill his promise to Joseph. He used Joseph to fulfill his promise to an entire nation. The dreams Joseph had as a boy, the visions of his family bowing before him, weren't about his personal greatness. They were about God's greater plan. By placing Joseph in a position of power, God ensured that Jacob's descendants, his chosen people, would survive the famine. In other words, God wasn't just blessing Joseph, he was securing the future of Israel. This should make us reflect. How often do we look at our struggles and think God has abandoned us, when in reality, he's setting us up for something greater? The Bible is full of moments where God's faithfulness is revealed in unexpected ways. Abraham and Sarah had to wait decades for their promised son. The Israelites wandered for years before reaching their land. Even Jesus, the ultimate fulfillment of God's promise, had to endure the cross before the resurrection. God's promises are sure, but his timing is his own. Joseph's story isn't just history, it's a roadmap for faith. His life teaches that even when we don't see the bigger picture, God is always at work. Every setback, every trial, every delay, it all serves a purpose. And the best part, what God promises, he completes. But to see the full scope of Joseph's journey, we need to rewind to where it all began, with a young boy, a multicolored coat, and a dream that would change everything. Joseph's story starts long before Egypt. It begins in a household filled with favoritism and resentment. Jacob, his father, loved him more than his other sons, and he didn't even try to hide it. That famous multicolored coat, it wasn't just a beautiful garment. It was a symbol of status, a declaration that Joseph was the chosen one among his brothers. And of course, that didn't sit well with them. Imagine growing up knowing your younger sibling is the favorite. Every meal, every interaction a reminder that you'll never be as special in your father's eyes. It's no surprise that jealousy started to brew, but Joseph didn't just have a fancy coat, he had dreams. And not just any dreams, but visions from God that hinted at his future greatness. When he shared them, his brother's resentment turned into hatred. Think about it. How do people react when someone speaks about a vision too big for them to comprehend? Skepticism, mockery, even anger. His brothers couldn't see past their own bitterness, and in their minds there was only one solution. Joseph had to go. So they did the unthinkable. They stripped him of his coat, threw him into a pit, and then sold him to a caravan of traders. Just like that, his life was ripped away from him. If that wasn't enough, Joseph's arrival in Egypt didn't bring relief. He was sold again, this time to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. But here's the thing about Joseph, he didn't let his circumstances define him. Instead of complaining, he worked diligently, earning Potiphar's trust and rising to a position of responsibility. This alone is a lesson. How many people today get stuck in bitterness when life takes an unexpected turn? Joseph could have wallowed in self-pity, but instead he excelled where he was planted. And just when it seemed like things were improving, trouble came knocking. Potiphar's wife, captivated by Joseph's appearance and character, tried to seduce him. But Joseph was a man of integrity. He refused her advances, choosing righteousness over momentary pleasure. That decision cost him everything. Falsely accused of assault, he was thrown into prison, betrayed once again. It's a scenario that feels painfully unjust, and yet it's a crucial part of his journey. Sometimes, doing the right thing leads to hardship, but here's the twist: even in prison, God was with him. The very place meant to break him became the next stepping stone in his destiny. Joseph's life at this stage is a roller coaster of highs and lows, victories and betrayals. But through it all, one thing remained constant: God's presence. And it's in this dark, forgotten prison cell that something extraordinary happens. Because even behind bars, Joseph's gift doesn't fade. He interprets dreams, revealing divine messages to his fellow prisoners. And one day, this very ability will bring him face to face with the most powerful man in Egypt. Prison was supposed to be the end for Joseph, but God had other plans. Even behind bars, his gift made room for him. He didn't just sit in despair, he became a leader, gaining the trust of the prison warden. And then, something remarkable happened. Two of Pharaoh's officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, were thrown into the same prison. One night, both had troubling dreams. With no one to interpret them, they turned to Joseph, who didn't hesitate. He made it clear: the ability to interpret dreams came from God, not from him. That right there is a powerful lesson. Even in suffering, Joseph didn't lose sight of where his wisdom came from. The cupbearer's dream predicted his restoration to Pharaoh's service, while the baker's dream foretold his execution. And, just as Joseph had said, both outcomes came to pass. But before the cupbearer left, Joseph asked for one favor: remember me when you're restored. It was a reasonable request. After all, Joseph had just given him the best news of his life. But what happened? The cupbearer forgot him. 2 more years passed. Imagine that. 2 years of waiting, knowing that the person who could help you had moved on. Many would have given up, but Joseph remained faithful, trusting that God's timing is never wrong. Then, one night, Pharaoh had a dream, one that no magician or wise man in Egypt could interpret. Suddenly, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. Just like that, Joseph went from prisoner to standing before the most powerful ruler in the world. This moment is crucial. After years of hardship, Joseph's opportunity had arrived. But here's what's even more amazing. When Pharaoh asked if he could interpret dreams, Joseph didn't take credit. He said, "I cannot do it, but God will." Give Pharaoh the answer he desires. That's humility. Even when the spotlight was finally on him, he pointed back to God. Pharaoh's dream was more than just a strange vision. It was a divine warning. 7 years of abundance were coming, followed by 7 years of devastating famine. And Joseph didn't just interpret the dream, he provided a strategy. He advised Pharaoh to appoint someone wise to store grain during the good years, ensuring survival when the famine hit. This wasn't just dream interpretation, it was prophetic leadership. Pharaoh recognized this wisdom immediately, and in an instant Joseph went from prisoner to the second most powerful man in Egypt. Only Pharaoh himself was above him. Think about the speed of this transformation. One day, he's forgotten in a dungeon. The next, he's riding in Pharaoh's second chariot, dressed in royal robes. That's how God works. Years of preparation can lead to a sudden breakthrough. But Joseph's journey wasn't just about his personal success. His rise to power was part of a much bigger plan, one that would soon bring him face to face with the very people who betrayed him. Joseph's life is proof that God's plans always unfold, even when they seem delayed. From slavery to leadership, from betrayal to redemption, his journey wasn't just personal, it was prophetic. But now, the question is yours to answer. Are you willing to trust God's timing in your own life? How often do we lose faith when things don't happen as fast as we expect? Joseph waited years, but in the end, every moment had a purpose. And what about his body? Why did God allow it to remain in Egypt for centuries before reaching the Promised Land? Could there be a deeper message behind this mystery? Biblical history is filled with hidden truths waiting to be uncovered. What else might we have overlooked? If you want to keep exploring biblical secrets, prophecies, and revelations, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next incredible discovery. Let's keep unlocking the mysteries of faith together.